This is Brad Keithley, Managing Director of Alaskans for Sustainable Budgets. Welcome to the weekly Top 3, the top 3 things on our mind here at Alaskans for Sustainable Budgets for the week of July 20th, 2026. The weekly Top 3 is a regular segment on The Michael Dukes Show. The show broadcasts on both Facebook Live and YouTube Live, as well as via streaming audio from the show's website, weekdays from 6 to 8 a.m. I join Michael weekly in the first hour of Tuesday's show from 6:10 to 7 a.m. for a discussion between the two of us about our 3 issues. We post the podcast of our discussion following the show on the Alaskans for Sustainable Budgets Facebook, YouTube, SoundCloud, Spotify, and Substack pages, also on the Alaskans for Sustainable Budgets website, as well as the project's page on national blog site, medium.com. You can find past episodes of the weekly Top 3 also at the same locations. Keep in mind that in addition to these podcasts, during the week, you can also follow and participate in the discussion with us of these and other issues affecting Alaska's fiscal and economic condition by following us on the Alaskans for Sustainable Budgets Facebook page and through our posts on Twitter. This week, our top 3 issues are these. First, we discuss the surprising results from comparing the income tax rate on middle-income Alaska families resulting from PFD cuts against the income tax rates on middle-income families in other states. Second, we try to bring some clarity to the seeming confusion about where the Southcentral gas supply sits heading into the next winter. And third, we explain why we draw a straight line from the failure of the legislature earlier this session to treat Governor Dunleavy's proposed sales tax seriously to where we are now on the S-corp tax. And now, let's join Michael.
Well, Brad, I hate to do it, but I got to rip the Band-Aid off. Let's get into it, I guess. Let's start off with number 1, where Brad has another statistic about the impact of the PFD. I didn't bring the slides up, so I'll get those going. But that's where we're going to start off. So hit me with it, Brad.
So once I get a spreadsheet going, it's hard for me to stop because I have all these databases I can go to and start, trying to put the numbers that I've got in perspective. Last week we did a segment on the PFD and what the PFD cuts look like as a tax on adjusted gross income. And these aren't just cuts. These aren't just the impact on the PFD itself. This isn't a share of the PFD. It's when you add the PFD cut to income, to adjusted gross income, and then calculate the impact of the PFD cut on total adjusted gross income, which is the way you do income taxes or any taxes. And we looked at that last week, and that showed over the span of time the PFD cuts as a share of adjusted gross income, Alaska adjusted gross income, going up and down, but over the last several years since 2023, sort of just going up, and showing from 2023 doubling from 6% to over 5.4% in the most recent cut. So that was an effort to look at what PFD cuts are doing to average income. And I want to stress, I think it's important to understand, this is the impact on middle income families. This isn't the impact on lower income families or upper income families, because PFD cuts are so regressive. It's much less than that 5.4% on upper income families. It's much more than that 5.4% on lower income families. This is an effort to look at it right in the middle, what the impact is on middle income families. So I had that number. And then I have databases that deal with adjusted gross income in other states, average adjusted gross income in other states, which you can get from the IRS statistics. And I had income from the Tax Foundation on what the state income tax rates are in other states. And so this week, what I did was look at what the impact of PFD cuts are on Alaska families as a share of income compared to the income tax rates that you find in other states that have income taxes. And this is all the states. This chart is all the states that have state level income taxes. And what you see is that the PFD cut that we have in Alaska is, again, on an average income, a middle income Alaska family, middle income Alaska household, which is what all of these are calculated on. Middle income households. The PFD cut, the Alaska's PFD tax, is the third largest tax on adjusted gross income of any state that has a tax on adjusted gross income. Idaho is the top. Idaho. I mean, that was a surprise, because you would think of people normally think of Idaho as a very conservative state, but it has a flat rate income tax of 5.8% in Idaho, and then Oregon's the next highest. And again, a lot of these states, somebody will say, well, California is a lot higher than that. Well, they have higher marginal rates. They have higher rates that apply to upper income families, and they have lower rates that apply to lower income families. This is the average. This is the impact on middle income families. This is the impact on the average adjusted gross income in each state under each state income tax. So I'm just trying to look at how each state deals with middle income families, and so Idaho's the top at 5.8%. Oregon is at 5.6%. Alaska with the PFD tax is at 5.3%. And then you go all the way through all the states. You've got New Mexico, you've got Louisiana, you've got other states in there. Oklahoma has an income tax, and North Dakota is at the bottom with 0.6%. Again, the impact on middle income families in North Dakota of 6%. So when people say, well, PFD cuts, they aren't much, don't worry about those. As a share of income of middle income families in Alaska, the PFD tax is currently now putting Alaska as the third highest tax in the U.S., state level tax in the U.S. Now that bounces around. I mean, if you look back at the prior chart, you can see that the tax rate sort of depends on the year. So it's 2.61 in 2023. It was 3.93 in 2025, and so on. But on the latest tax rate, the one that the legislature enacted this past year, that's hitting Alaskans this year, is 5.4. And when that translates over to the average impact, when it translates over to the impact, it's the third largest state. So it is. I mean, PFD cut. People try to minimize the impact of PFD cuts. They try to minimize the impact of PFD cuts on the Alaska economy. They try to minimize the impact of PFD cuts on outmigration. They try to minimize the impact on what it's doing to Alaska households. But when you stack it up against what's going on elsewhere in the U.S., you see that PFD cuts, the impact on Alaska is significant and indeed huge compared to the other states that have state income taxes.
It is it's astonishing to look at for folks on the radio. Brad's got this graduated chart that starts on the left with the highest in Idaho at 5.8 and runs all the way to the smallest in North Dakota with 0.6, and Alaska is this big red bar right in the middle. And again, people aren't thinking. I mean, we got people arguing with us, Brad, on this program that say, oh no, it's not a tax because you never saw the money, so it's not really a tax. It's just free money that they're taking away. You just lost some of your free money. But again, I can't remember if it was Milton Friedman. I think it was Milton Friedman that made some comment about how one of the evilest things was the withholding tax, because we never see it, so we never feel the cost. And that's part of what we're looking at here. The money is withheld. I mean, we just talked about, $670 million, roughly $678 million was the cost of $1,000 PFD for every applicant in the state of Alaska. If they'd paid the full PFD, it would have been closer to $2 billion. Can you imagine the impact of $1.4 billion on the economy? Forget about individuals. Forget about, people and business owners buying tires or putting heating oil in the tank or buying TVs or just reinvesting in their business or starting up a business. $1.4 billion a year for the last almost 10 years now has been socked away from the people of Alaska. And that's a huge, huge impact.
Yeah. In discussions I'm having, I'm finally, figuring out what really, what hits up people when they say, "Oh, it's free money." To me, and I explain this to others. To me, what the PFD is Alaska's equivalent of oil royalties. I mean, there's oil royalties to mineral interest owners in Oklahoma and Texas and Louisiana. Those royalties go to private sector individuals. The private sector individuals then spend those or do whatever they do with them in the private economy in those states, and it generates a significant amount of activity in the private economy in those states. In Alaska, because we own the resource in common, because it's a commonly held resource, we distribute our oil royalties, same sort of thing as in the other states. We distribute our royalties through the form of the PFD. I mean, it's not any different. It's how the private sector component of the mineral interest income is distributed to the mineral interest owners. And so when you look at it that way, and you look at the statutory framework for what that mineral interest owner share is supposed to be, and then you look at the government withholding it and diverting it. I mean, that's as clear a tax as in Oklahoma, where when a producer is getting ready to mail the royalty check to the mineral interest owner, the producer has to withhold and divert to the state a share of that mineral interest distribution, the share of that royalty distribution to the state as tax. It's the same thing that's going on up here. I mean, people who don't want to look at it that way are usually in the top 20%, and they say, "Oh, it's a trivial amount. Don't worry about it." Well, it's trivial to them, but it's not trivial to middle and lower income Alaska families. And this chart is a way of trying to express that what we're doing up here in Alaska with these diversions, with these withholdings and diversions, is huge compared to what's going on with taxes in other states.
But don't worry, they're going to get it right this next time. They're going to get it right this time. Frank says, "I beg to differ. We, the people, do not own the royalty. The legislature owns it," right? I mean, that has the effect of it. I mean, they have the effect of owning it at this point. They can decide whatever the hell they want to do with it.
So in my, again, state's governed by statutes, right? We're governed by laws, and laws are in the statutes. It to me, what's going on in Alaska is no different, frankly, than goes on in the lower 48 when you have a family royalty trust. I've set up a few of those when I was down in the lower 48. And what a family royalty trust is, a family owns the mineral interest. And so there's an administrator that brings in that receives the mineral revenue, the royalty revenue. And sometimes they invest it. I mean, sometimes it's sort of like the permanent fund, right? They invest it and generate additional returns before they distribute it. You do that to sort of equalize the revenue across time. And so it's a family royalty trust. There's an administrator who is administering the trust according to the trust rules, and is to distribute the proceeds according to the trust rules to the family members. To me, that's we've got that set up in Alaska. We have a huge family. We own the mineral interest in common, so it's the residents of the state. But there are trust rules set by statute, and the trust rules are supposed to provide for the distribution. To me, what's going on is the equivalent of, in a lower 48 mineral interest trust, the administrator saying, "Oh, you don't need all that money. I need to buy a new Rolls Royce, or I need to buy a new house, or I need to take a long vacation in Europe. And so I'm going to keep that money, a portion of that money, for my needs, instead of distributing it according to the trust rules to the trust members, trust beneficiaries." And that's what, to me, is going on in Alaska. We have, I've been around this stuff a long time. I've been around the way lower 48 operates. I've been around the way royalties operate a long time. And to me, it's what we're doing in Alaska is very normal. We have a setup. We have a trust set up. We have a trust administrator. We're supposed to be distributing the proceeds of the trust to the trust beneficiaries. And what we've got is the trust administrator just converting a portion of the money to their own benefit. When a government does it, you call that taxes. I mean, when the government withholds, it's like government employees, right? And government employees are paid by the government, but the state withholds a portion of their, in other states, the state withholds a portion of their distribution to their employees, and diverts it to other government uses. That's what's going on here. The administrator is failing to follow the rules of the trust, and they can do that because the legislature has those powers in Alaska, but that doesn't make it any less of a tax on the beneficiaries of the trust when the government does it.
It's and it's tough to fight this. That's the thing. I mean, everybody's joking. Well, it's just Randy that's saying it. I know it's Randy that's just saying it in the chat room. But the problem is there's a ton of people out there who believe exactly like Randy. Well, it can't be a tax because they're not calling it a tax. And so it can't really be. But again, whether it's called a tax or it's called a fuzzy bunny, whatever it is, it has the same effect on the economy. It has the same effect on average Alaskans. It has the same effect on everyone. And the effect is, again, that it grows the government while stifling the private economy. That's exactly what the effect is in the long run, Brad.
Yeah, and this chart is to show is growing government. We're taking more out of the pockets of middle-income families in Alaska through this tax than is taken out in the other, except for Idaho and Oregon, taken out in any other state that has an income tax. We are tax heavy in Alaska. So when people say, "Oh, Alaska doesn't have any taxes," to me, they don't know what they don't understand what they're saying.
I've made that argument for years that we're the most heavily taxed state in the nation, because if you took all that revenue and put it directly to the people and then tax them back, every person in the state's paying $20,000+ per person in taxes, essentially, because it's all coming from those royalties and from that revenue and from the permanent fund. We're all getting screwed on that deal. Brad Keithley, Alaskans for Sustainable Budgets, and the weekly top 3. We're on to number 2. The confusion around Southcentral gas, Brad, and there's a lot of it. I mean, we saw the RCA decision, we saw all this other stuff. We see what's going on with NSTAR and Chugach and S-corp and everything else. And we're like, do we have a crisis or don't? We had a conversation with John Hendricks from Hex the other day. Do we have a crisis or don't we have a crisis? What is the confusion around the Southcentral gas?
The thing that triggered this was an article in the Alaska Public Media News, the headlines of which was "Natural gas supplies, quote, not looking good," close quote, for Southcentral this winter, NSTAR says. And that sort of, encapsulated the confusion that I think is going on about what's going on. So keep in mind, there are 2 different measures of gas that's important for this purpose. One is deliverability. How much can NSTAR deliver on a day? And the other is supply, total supply. How much does NSTAR deliver in a year? Those are two entirely different things, and they are related in that they both relate to gas, but they are 2 entirely different things. When NSTAR says that natural gas supply is not looking good for Southcentral this winter, what they're saying is we may not have deliverability. We may not be able to meet peak day or near peak demands in Southcentral for gas on the coldest days or on the days of highest demand. And that is due to the lack of being able to turn on the faucet and immediately getting all you need. NSTAR has a storage field that will supply some of that. So they get it 2 different ways in the winter. One is normal supply that's coming through their pipeline that producers are delivering on any given day, coming through the pipeline. That meets a portion of the winter demand. The remainder of the winter demand is met through storage, and NSTAR has a storage field that helps supplement its deliverability on any given day. That storage field over the course of a winter, it may be full at the beginning of the winter, but that storage field, as it's pulled at during the course of the winter, will start playing down. It's what the industry calls a huff and puff. So you can refill it during the course of the winter if you have semi-warm days that you don't have full demand, but we don't have many of those in Alaska over the course of the winter. So basically, you start full, and then you start gradually going down over time as the winter plays on. And the real issue is whether, as you get toward the end of the winter, the end of the whether you have really cold days at the beginning, which causes you to pull down a lot of storage right at the beginning, and then what happens later in the winter if you have another set of cold days, you don't have as much storage availability, you don't have as much storage deliverability as you had at the beginning, and so you may have a tough time meeting that late deliverability. I think that's what Sims is talking about in this coming winter. That coupled with the pipeline deliveries, the field deliveries that he's getting from producers may not be as strong as they've been in the past in the course of the winter. So you may be more reliant on your storage to give you deliverability that previously had come from pipeline deliveries. That's an issue. That's an issue that we've had for the last few years as pipeline gas has sort of drifted down in terms of the winter volume as the storage field has from time to time undergone some issues in adding to the deliverability when you get to cold days. That's one issue. Then we've got additional issues about what's happening in the long term as the supply from the Cook Inlet overall supply from the Cook Inlet annual supply plays down. You've got less and less in the pipe on cold winter days. You're more and more dependent on deliverability coming from storage. And I think that is not this coming year, but I think as you look at future years, that's where NSTAR has been focused on developing this additional storage field that was the subject of the RCA decision earlier this month. NSTAR views the need for additional deliverability as we get farther out in the future, as the supply from existing pipeline supplies and existing producer supplies start playing down. And so NSTAR needs additional storage to have that additional deliverability during the winter. And the RCA, a combination of things have put that up in the air. NSTAR applied to the RCA for what they called advanced approval, preliminary approval of the storage field. So they would know they would be able to recover the costs of. They asked to be able to recover the costs of the storage field once they build it in rates. The RCA turned that down because the RCA said a couple of reasons. One, they said the Department or Natural Resources hasn't approved the storage field yet. There's a dispute about who owns the storage field. There's a dispute about whether it can operate as a storage field. And so the RCA said, well, it's too preliminary to deal with this issue because you don't have resolution out of the DNR, which you need, about whether this storage field, who owns the storage field, who owns the pore space.
And who's the two? Is it NSTAR and HillCorp? Is that who's fighting out who owns the field?
It is. HillCorp has made claim that they own the pore space, and NSTAR believes another producer owns the pore space. The producer from whom they're buying what's called pore space. It's the space into which you can put gas, pore gas, I guess. Two different terms, but having the same meaning. And there's a question about who owns the pore space in the field. And so DNR's got to resolve that. And the RCA said, and DNR has yet to resolve it. And so the RCA said, well, until you resolve it, we don't know whether this is a real field or not, a real project or not. We're not going to approve a blank check for you on something that we don't know is real and something that we can't sort of evaluate and understand and get our arms around. But NSTAR, I don't think anybody disputes. I don't think the RCA would dispute. Certainly, I don't think the RCA would dispute that NSTAR needs additional storage capacity as the production from the fields, particularly the deliverability from the fields, the winter day deliverability from the fields in the Cook Inlet play down. NSTAR also needs this storage space when we go to LNG imports, and we are going to go to LNG imports at least for a time. When we go to LNG imports, NSTAR also needs the storage because the best time to buy LNG is in the summer. That's when the prices are lowest. Japan doesn't have the Asian markets don't have a lot of storage over there, so they tend to buy what they need on peak. They tend to, buy a lot in the winter months, and so the prices in the winter months are much higher than the prices in the summer months. So, NSTAR, which does have the ability to develop storage, wants to develop storage to be able to buy LNG in the summer and store it. And there's other, Hex, John's company, Hex, Bluecrest down off Anchor Point. Those companies are capable of producing gas, but they can't commit to it on a firm basis because they're not sure that how their wells are going to produce during winter. They're not willing to make the financial commitment to say we will absolutely produce. We'll invest whatever it takes to produce. And what Sims wants to do is to buy their gas on an interruptible basis whenever they have it, in the summer, in the winter, whenever they have it, and put it into the storage field to enhance his deliverability, right, as the pipeline deliverability from the lower 48 from the Cook Inlet wells plays out. So, there are issues all through that cycle, but that's what's going on. It's an issue about deliverability. From NSTAR's standpoint, it's an issue about deliverability. Will we have the gas on the cold days? And that revolves around two things. It revolves around storage, and it revolves around the deliverability coming from their pipeline supplies.
So 2027 is the predicted date in which we hit the true crunch, right? We've already been on the verge a couple times, and this last winter was super brutal. And there was already talk, and now they're saying in 2027 it could be bad enough that they could have rolling blackouts, where they shut things down, or and that's when people start asking questions. What does that mean? Does that mean I won't be able to heat my home or keep the lights on for periods of time, or what does that mean? Where are we at? Why are we? We're 1 year away from this, or less, going into this next winter. We're 5-6 months away from this. And if not now, then when? Why is the RCA holding it up? Why is NSTAR taking so long? What's the DNR doing? Give me, walk me through what happens if this deliverability doesn't get delivered.
Well, you're never going to turn houses off. Houses are going to be the absolutely last thing you turn off, because if you turn off a house, if you cut gas supplies to a house, you got all sorts of things. You got all sorts of problems getting it restored, so you don't have explosions. and so the houses are the absolute last thing you ever turn off. What you have is a hierarchy of things that you turn off as you start having deliverability problems. Things you turn off in order to preserve the pressure you need to deliver it to homes. And I think the top of the list in the South Central area is MEA, which has a dual fired boiler, or dual fired electric generation capacity. They can either fire it with natural gas, or they can fire it with diesel fuel. And I think that's at the top of the list in terms of things you turn off. You turn off the gas to that. And you start firing it with, or you limit the gas to that, and you start firing that generator with diesel fuel. So I don't think we're really talking about rolling blackouts, at least in the near term. I don't think we're really talking about rolling blackouts. I think we're talking about things that will have an economic impact, because diesel fuel is more expensive than gas, at least currently. And so there will be a higher cost to running the generator on diesel fuel than on gas. And then you've got JBear. You can turn down the gas on JBear. That's what we've done before. When we had a deliverability issue a couple of years ago, NSTAR had a storage well down that wasn't operating perfectly when they hit peak. And so they had to do some temporary reductions, and I think there was a reduction at JBear. So you've got a hierarchy of things that they get turned down. We're not going to have rolling blackouts from a gas standpoint. We're not going to have rolling cutoffs to homes in South Central. That will be the absolute last thing that goes.
I guess
we'll have other ways to deal with it.
I guess that's good to know, but then the question still becomes, what's being done about the deliverability. If NSTAR is premature and the RCA is like, you're still premature, and the DNR hasn't decided, and I mean, where do we go from here? I mean, again, this is all, again, we're all under the assumption now that the gas line is dead. And so where do we go from here on this? What happens next, Brad? Quickly.
DNR's got to get its act together and make a decision on that field. That would be helpful. If they decide it's Hillcorp's and it's not the supplier to NSTAR, not the company that's selling it to NSTAR, NSTAR has to go find other storage, and has to go develop other storage. And Sims has said they have other places in mind. They're going to be more expensive, but they have other places in mind. But I think the key to that particular little issue is getting DNR to decide who owns that field and whether that field's capable of being operated as a natural gas storage unit. And then from there, I mean, here's the thing that really is troubling me. We aren't making a whole lot of progress on the LNG imports. Everybody says we're going to need LNG imports. Even if the big line goes, we're going to need LNG imports for a period of time. People are talking about that, but there's no LNG facilities, importation facilities being built. And so we have a lot of people talking about having them, and maybe some plans are on the board, but we're not building them. So if we're facing, a declining deliverability from existing production facilities, even if you build new storage fields, that's not going to solve the entire problem. And we need to kick in with these LNG importation facilities at some point, and we're not getting them off the ground. So two things: get DNR off the ground on the immediate issue of the storage field, and focus on getting an LNG importation facility built.
Craig is feeling very spicy this morning. Craig says electricity prices will double throughout the state over the next year, but it's all fine to Brad. I don't think that's what he's saying. I don't think you're hearing what he's actually saying, Craig. I think that's not what he's saying is that's a bad thing. We were just talking about that before the show, Brad and I. That's a bad thing. If electricity prices double, it's going to be tough. We already saw what happened in Fairbanks, right? Yeah.
Look, there's only one situation under which electricity prices don't do that. I mean, they do that if we keep going down the track we are now with declining Cook Inlet production, and LNG importation. That's gonna double electricity prices. We're going to do that if we build the big line and we don't have international buyers. The cost of the big line, $16. I mean, what everybody declared victory when Glenfarne said, "Oh, we'll cap the price or we'll fix the price at $16 MMBTU for in-state deliveries." That's a huge price. It's a huge price jump from where we are now. We're about 10 now, so it's a huge price jump. May or may not be higher than LNG imports. LNG imports may be less than that, but that's a huge price jump. So we're headed there. It ain't me. It ain't Wilikowski. It ain't anybody who's liking that, but we're heading there. With in the only case that we're not is if the big line has international buyers and the international buyers pay a proportionate share of the pipeline. I mean, there's a real question in my mind that I've written about a couple of times in the landmine. There's a real question about whether the international buyers actually pay a proportionate share of the pipeline, or whether we're stuck paying $16 for in-state volumes forever, even if we get international buyers. But the only circumstance under which we're going to get electricity prices down is if international buyers come in and pay a proportionate share of the big line. And we don't have any international buyer that's committed to do that. So it's where we are.
Yeah, no. And no, Chris, Craig, the importing the LNG would not triple the electricity prices. It is still the most economical of all the other options that we have on the table, including Cook Inlet gas, which is going to be, again, that's going to make it tougher on some of the producers in Cook Inlet if we start importing that gas as well. There's lots of moving parts to this thing. And, I know a lot of people don't want to hear that, but Brad and I, before the gas line discussion really got started, looking at all the options, importing was the only viable option in the short term and even into the long term, as far as that goes. I mean, Frank says coal, but I mean, coal requires building of new plants and everything else. I mean, we're talking about now. We're talking about not 5 years from now. We're talking about now. How do we survive the 5 years?
And what Craig continually overlooks is building the big line and not having international buyers paying a proportionate share of the big line, which are two separate things. Building the big line and not having international buyers share a proportionate share of the pipeline is also going to triple electricity prices. I mean, is also going to have the same impact as importing LNG. It's not going to triple electricity prices, but it's going to have the same impact as importing LNG. The price difference between the big line without international buyers paying a proportionate share of the cost of the line and LNG is minimal. Imported LNG is minimal. So that's happening under either condition. The only condition under which we get better and under which Alaska gets better is the big line with international buyers paying a proportionate share of the cost of the big line. And we don't have anybody on the hook willing to do that right now.
Well, and you were saying, we haven't even moved on this import facility. I know we've talked about Nikiski. I know that N-Star is talking about wanting to build something in the Point McKenzie and everything else. Where's it going? Where's the import? We got to get off the stick here, right? This has got to go.
Yeah, one big question is Glenfarne. N-Star has hooked their future to Glenfarne building an import facility, and if Glenfarne walks, are they going to finish the import facility? We've got one. There's a turnaround of the old Kenai LNG export facility that Hillcorp now owns, and that's going to provide some capability of importing LNG. But N-Star said they don't want to use that one for whatever reason, and so we may have some resolution there or some solution there, but we don't have people contracting or committing to it yet. So you're right. We got all these moving parts and they're not settling down.
Right. They're all moving in different directions. That's the thing. It's like a rowboat with 15 people in it and everybody's rowing in a different direction at this point. Continuing now, Brad Keithley, Alaskans for Sustainable Budgets. Probably the strongest statement that Brad has made in a while. There's a straight line from the failure of the legislature earlier in this session to treat Dunleavy's proposed sales tax seriously to where we are now on the S-corp tax. There's a straight line from Dunleavy's proposed sales tax to the S-corp tax, and Brad's about to connect the dots. Okay, where are we at, Brad?
$1.9 billion. I haven't started any other segment with that this week, but
okay.
I want to get this one started. $1.9 billion. That's the deficits that the state's running. When you look at when you look out 10 years and you look at projected revenues and you look at projected spending, just holding spending to inflation, spending increases to inflation. When you look out 10 years, we're running an average of $1.9 billion deficits over that period of time. And I know people will say, "Oh, we're gonna solve that through spending cuts." To do spending cuts, you'd have to cut spending over that period of time 25% every year, and you would have to do that over the full 10-year period. And that's more than Dunleavy proposed. That's a bigger percentage of spending cuts than Dunleavy proposed even in 2019. And he couldn't get 16 Republicans. He couldn't get 16 in the legislature, 16 out of 60, to back him up on the threatened vetoes to get down to that level. So he didn't do the vetoes down to that level, and we ended up with increased spending, and we've had increased spending going on since. So while spending cuts, spending modifications, spending control is a part of the solution, that is not the total solution. We need revenues to deal with that $1.9 billion gap. Dunleavy, to his credit, proposed at the beginning of the session to try to deal with that gap, a portion of that gap, through the statewide sales tax. And the legislature, it had one hearing basically in House Finance, and the House Finance Committee members took turns throwing up all over it, saying, "Well, this doesn't work. We don't like that." They had AML, the Alaska Municipal League, in there testifying about why it wouldn't work. I mean, it was just a festival of people throwing up on this proposal. It would have worked. I mean, Dunleavy had just had ICER make a presentation demonstrating why not only it could work, but why it was in Alaska's best interest to work as opposed to continuing to use PFD cuts as a way of closing that fiscal gap, and why it was better for Alaska families and why it was better for the Alaska economy to do the statewide sales tax. But the legislature just threw up all over it. So what you have, I mean, legislators who say, "Oh, we can't consider this S-corp closing the S-corp loophole as a portion of anything. We need a separate bill." What you have is a straight line between where we began the session in terms of, well, we can't do that. We can't do a seasonal sales tax. We can't, help close this budget deficit through a seasonal sales tax. To me, you have a straight line from there to the end where, okay, you can't do that. We got to go find other things. People don't want to do that. We got to go find other things as a way of helping to close the $1.9 billion deficit. The S-corp fix is one way of doing that. And now we get, and we got to the end of the session and say, well, people were saying, well, you can't do that either. So, it's, you just, what we're doing is we're going from one thing. We tried with Dunleavy's seasonal sales tax, good proposal, solid proposal, backed up by ICER, backed up by good solid analysis. Legislators throw up all over that. Okay, well, we go to the next thing, and the next thing is closing the S-corp loophole. And now we have legislators at the end of the session saying, well, you can't do that either. I mean, that's a bad thing. That's a bad thing also. We're going to have to address this issue someday. And it's getting worse the longer we don't address it, because spending is going on. We're not having people push back on spending who would if they had to pay a portion of it. And it just keeps getting worse and worse. So we're gonna have to address it someday. The S-corp, fixing the S-corp loophole was one way. It was another way to try to address it. And now we have people saying you can't do that either. There's a lot of stuff that went on last week. But I think Dunleavy's veto threat, frankly, from my perspective, will be the thing I look back as the biggest thing that happened last week. We were at the high water mark. Yeah, and I know some people didn't like it, but we were at the high water mark of the gas line legislation. We had the property tax fix that Glenfarne said they needed. Even at the end, and I was upset by this, but even at the end, we had the legislature, the conference committee, willing to take the S-corp tax off of Glenfarne. Now, maybe it was, as Rob Myers has pointed out, maybe it was just sort of a temporary diversion, that they were going to go back and do it later on. I think they can do it. I think they could do it at the S-corp fix to Glenfarne, and I think it wouldn't affect project economics. I've argued that before, but they had taken it off of Glenfarne. They'd taken the S-corp fix off of Glenfarne. So you had a bill that did everything Glenfarne said they wanted. Property tax fix. The legislature, the conference committee, had taken out all that stuff about control that Glenfarne had objected to. You had a fairly clean bill on Glenfarne, and then you had the S-corp fix with it. A needed element of getting to that $1.9 billion. And Dunleavy's veto message, I'm going to look back at that, and I'm going to say that's where things went south, because we had a clean bill, or fairly clean bill. We had the S-corp fix along with it, which was dealing with the revenue issues that we've got in the state. It was on its way to him. If he hadn't have said he was going to veto it, there's an open question in my mind about whether it would have gotten through the House and gotten to him. And he just said he wasn't going to put up with it. So I think that we're going to look back on that as the high water mark, at least of this legislature, in terms of gas line legislation. There's been the leadership of both bodies now have sent messages to their members saying, don't bother to show up for the opening day. It's going to be a technical session, and really not being very clear on anything that's going to go on during this coming special session. I don't expect much from it. And I think we're going to, get to the end of the year, the end of this legislature, and that's it. We had the high water mark. For whatever reason, Dunleavy decided not to take the offer that was on the table, and we end the year without any legislation, without any resolution on the gas line. But going back to the beginning, there to me is a clear line from the beginning of the session where people threw up on the proposed seasonal sales tax, and the end of the session where people are throwing up on the S-corp fix. There's got to be revenues in here someplace, and if you're going to keep throwing up on them, on proposals on how to get those revenues, then we're never going to get this fixed.
Well, again, my argument on this is if the gas line was so important and so needed, this fix was so needed, why muddy the waters again with the? I mean, I agree that we need to examine an S-corp tax. I mean, that may make me unpopular, but that's just the way it is. We should examine it. But I think that if the gas line was so important, why did we have to muddy the waters with it at this point? Is it just because otherwise it wouldn't get passed? I mean, it didn't get passed anyway, but is that the argument? Because otherwise we could have just passed a clean bill with just the volumetric tax and probably be on our way to something bigger. Why now?
I'm not sure we would be on our way to something bigger, but I think they are co-equal issues. I think that yes, the LNG line is important. I think it's important for a lot of reasons, but also fixing our fiscal situation is important. And to me, frankly, it's a bigger issue. If we don't get our fiscal situation fixed, we're going to tax ourselves into oblivion, trying to deal with what we've built here. And I think it's a co-equal argument. Was it appropriate in this bill because it's the only way that the S-corp fix was ever going to get passed? Maybe. Was it appropriate in this bill because we're talking about gas, we're talking about gas producers, and we're talking about a gas line, the oil and gas industry, and the S-corp fix is applicable to the oil and gas industry? Was it appropriate for that? Yeah, I think so. But you can't. We shouldn't say, oh, there's just one issue. We need to pass something for one issue, and we'll get to this other issue later on. We won't. I mean, we won't. I mean, people who say, "Oh, we'll consider the S-corp bill on a separate track." Jamie Allard said, "Yeah, let's consider the S-corp bill on a separate track," and I won't vote for it then either. I mean, it's just we've got to deal with the fiscal issue, and if dealing with the fiscal issue means it comes as a package with other issues, then so be it. But we've got to deal with the fiscal issue, and throwing up on the sales tax proposal at the beginning of the session. Frankly, I look back on those Republicans who threw up on all the members of the legislature who threw up on that fix and say, look, it's on you. It's in part on you that we got down to this S-corp issue at the end. If you're not going to fix revenues there, then we've got to fix revenues someplace. And it came up here, and we've got to fix revenues. And so it's timely to do it here as well.
Doom and gloom, Brad. Doom and gloom. That's kind of where we're at here. Again, I understand your point of saying we'll come back to it later. They never come back to it. But again, the idea of passing something like that without the full process, without going through, without public hearings, without everything else, it irks me. It just irks me. But I understand your position. I'm just saying we would have been potentially closer to a gas line if we just left it as a clean bill. And unfortunately, we can't.
But farther away from a budget fix, Michael. I mean, deeper into the hole on fixing the fiscal issue. People who say, "Oh, we haven't considered the S-corp fix enough. We haven't studied it enough." We've had the S-corp issue since Hillcorp bought BP. People have thought about the S-corp issue. People have worked on the S-corp issue. People have analyzed the S-corp issue. I've analyzed the S-corp issue. There's been thought about it, given to it, work on it since Hillcorp bought BP. So to say, oh, it's coming out of the thin air or coming out of the blue and dropping into this, no, it's dropping into this because we got S-corps involved in this. We got S-corps involved in terms of the pipeline. We've got S-corps involved in terms of the gas suppliers to it. Hillcorp certainly is one of the gas suppliers to the project. We've got S-corps involved in it. So if we're going to get an S-corp fix, it's appropriate to fix it at the time that we have S-corps involved in something that's before the legislature.
Where do we go from here, Brad? Now that the special session is dead, and we could see that the next special session they're already going to technical gavel in, gavel out. Where do we go from here? What happens now?
I think it goes to the election. It goes to the next governor, and the next governor makes proposals about how to deal with it. And hopefully, the next governor makes proposals also about how to deal with the fiscal shape that we're in, and we go with it from there. And Hillcorp may or may not stick around. I mean, Glen Farm may or may not stick around. They should, but they may decide that they've had enough of this fun and go off someplace else. And so we just deal with the cards that we have at that time. As I said, I think we hit the high water mark. I think Dunleavy should have said, I will sign the bill. I don't like it. Nobody likes pieces of it, but I will sign the bill. I think he should have said that with the S-corp fix in it. And I think he should have signed the bill, and then we would be we would have some addressing of our fiscal issues, and B, we would have the gas pipeline wherever the heck Glen Farm said they needed the gas line to be, and we'd be off. I think he should have done that, but he didn't. So we're, as I said at some point in previous segments, look, if Dunleavy if the S-corp fix gets through as it should, and if Dunleavy vetoes the bill, that's on Dunleavy. And I think it's on Dunleavy. I think we got to the end of this process, horrible process as it was. I think we got to the end of this process. We saw where it was going to be, and Dunleavy said, not going to do it. So he was saying not going to do it both to the S-corp fix and to the gas side, the gas pipeline side of it when he said that.
I think Kevin nails the whole thing in a nutshell when he said, when we did away with the income tax, we created the issue. And I think that's what Hammond was talking about. Hammond said at the time, Hammond said, don't eliminate it, just zero it out, because we may need to bring it back at some point. I'm paraphrasing here, but that's essentially what Hammond had said. He said, don't eliminate it, just zero it out and leave it on the books. And that's where we're at.
Yeah. I mean, what Hammond talked about was having it hang there like the sword of Damocles, right? If you can't get your fiscal house in order, the income tax kicks in, and that's how we deal with it, which would have put pressure on the top 20%, would have put pressure on, anybody subject to the income tax to start pushing back on spending. I mean, that's what Hammond, I reread parts of Hammond's books from time to time, and it's just, the guy was just genius. I mean, he saw how this whole thing worked. He said, if you want to get legislators to stop doing something, tell them there will be a tax if they continue doing it. If you want legislators to close the fiscal gap, tell them there will be a tax if they don't close the fiscal gap, and they'll start closing the fiscal gap. So yeah, Kevin and I have diverted on a lot of issues, but we'll agree on that one. If the sword of Damocles, if we'd held that sword of Damocles over legislators, we'd be in a different place today.
Brad Keithley, Alaskans for Sustainable Budgets, the weekly top three. We're pretty much out of time at this point, Brad. Appreciate you coming on board. Thanks for being part of it. We will, I guess we'll see what happens in the coming weeks here. We'll see what happens next week.
Thanks for having me, Michael. I appreciate it.
It's always good to hear from you, my friend.
Well, that's a wrap for another week's edition of the weekly top three from Alaskans for Sustainable Budgets. Thank you again for joining us. Remember that you can find past episodes on our YouTube, SoundCloud, Spotify, and Substack pages, and keep track of us during the week on Facebook and Twitter. This has been Brad Keithley, Managing Director of Alaskans for Sustainable Budgets. We look forward to you joining us again next week for the next edition of the weekly top three.